Chapter 17. The Towboat Captain. "Oh, George!" Bess screamed, looking down into the hold for some sign of her cousin. Bess carried a flashlight and now tried to focus it into the black depths. Her hand shook, and she could not hold the light steady. There was no answer to her cry. The young people were fearful that George had been badly injured. "I'll go down and see what happened," Frank offered. Picking his way carefully down the steps, he found the girl lying in a huddled heap some feet from the base of the stairway. "George! George!" he called, sloshing through muddy water to reach her. He leaned down and gently lifted her up. She seemed dazed, but was able to stand. What happened?" George asked shakily. "You took a header," Frank replied. "I'll help you up the stairs." Bess, almost tearful with relief, and Jack reached down to assist the couple. The four young people walked out on the deck, and Frank offered to take George home at once. "Oh, I'll be all right," she said gamely. "Nothing hurts but my leg, and I can stand that." She would not hear of leaving the showboat until Nancy and Charles returned. The group sat down on the deck and discussed the mystery. As dawn broke, they began to worry anew about the missing couple. "We must do something to find Nancy and Charles," Bess insisted. Frank and Jack offered to take a canoe and try to locate them. "I guess you girls will be all right here alone in the daylight," Jack remarked. Just as they were about to leave, another canoe suddenly appeared. "Nancy! Charles!" the others shouted in relief. "I guess you all thought we were lost," Charles called. "Well, we were." Stories were quickly exchanged. The four who had stayed on the showboat were amazed to learn about Henry and Luvina. After telling them that Mr. de Laverne had hinted at some family secret in connection with the haunted showboat, Charles repeated his guess that there might be a skeleton aboard. Jack laughed. "And it's his ghost we saw walking around? Well, let's look for old Bonesy." But Bess insisted that the group leave at once. "We can come back another time. I'm worried about what the Havers will say." Charles smiled. "Don't worry. Mother will take care of that." "I'm sure she will," said Nancy. "And George, if you feel all right, I'd like to stay here a little while and look around the boat myself. Let's see if we can find out what the de Laverne's secret is." The young people spent another hour in an intensive search. Nancy even went down into the hold and flashed her light around. There were a few inches of water on the low side where the boat had listed. In the dry section, they found no clue to anything hidden there. Nancy said she was ready to leave, so she and Charles joined the others. "I inspected that old calliope very thoroughly," Frank spoke up. "Couldn't get a sound out of it. How do you all explain it's being played?" Nancy thought for a few moments, then replied, "I believe someone comes aboard with a record player and plays calliope music and hymns." "And the tom-tom too?" George asked. "He's got quite a record collection." The others laughed. Then Jack asked Nancy if she thought the person who did these things had been hired by someone or was actually the saboteur. "I don't know," the young detective replied. "But I've been wondering if there is some mechanism a distance from the showboat that triggers an alarm. That would account for all the sounds on the River Princess stopping just before the de Lavernes showed up." Charles suggested that the boys make a search in the waterways leading to the showboat. The girls waited on deck while they took the 3 canoes and scouted around. 20 minutes later they returned and reported that nothing had been found. Then the men probably used the bird calls or some other bayou sound as signals, Nancy decided. Jack looked at the girl intently. "If so, this means that there may be spies around all the time." "Probably it does," Nancy agreed. and it may also mean that there's not much point in our being so secretive." Frank laughed. "Well then, all we have to do is find the spies and the mystery will be solved." Nancy chuckled. "Right." To herself, she added, "And I'm going to enlist Uncle Rufus's aid to do this." When the three couples reached Charles' home, Mrs. Bartolome was greatly relieved to see them. "I was mighty worried about you all," she said, "but I didn't want to upset Mrs. Haver, so I phoned and told her you girls were staying all night." Nancy and Charles related the entire story. Mrs. Bartolome was particularly interested in learning about Mrs. Farwell and her brother. "I knew them fairly well years ago," she said. "I thought that after Mr. Farwell died, his widow had moved away. I'm dreadfully sorry to learn that her mind is no longer completely sound." "Have you any idea what the family secret in connection with the showboat may be?" Nancy asked Charles's mother. Mrs. Bartolome shook her head. "Surely it can't be anything disgraceful. The de Lavernes were very fine people. Henry is a graduate of Oxford in England." Charles's mother went on to say that Henry had always been intensely interested in the university and its activities, although he had graduated many, many years ago. Changing the subject, she said, "You all must be starving. We'll have breakfast at once." Because of the early hour, the servants were still asleep, so the group gathered in the kitchen and prepared orange juice, bacon and eggs, toast and cocoa themselves. Mrs. Bartolome caught Bess stifling a yawn. "Wouldn't you girls like to sleep for a while before you return to the Havers?" she asked solicitously. They all confessed that they would. After Frank and Jack had said goodbye, the three girls went to the guest rooms and slept soundly for 4 hours. Then they put on their dinner frocks and left for Sunnymead. As Nancy parked her car there, Donna May rushed out to meet them. "My goodness!" she exclaimed. "You really made a visit. Tell me about everything." "To begin with," Nancy said, "we had a perfectly delicious dinner and breakfast." "The Bartolome's gardens are absolutely heavenly," Bess added. "I thoroughly enjoyed my walk in them." George grinned impishly. "Oh, don't be so stingy with your information, girls." Donna May, 2 charming boys, came to join us. Maybe you know them, Frank Morris and Jack Memory. "Oh, yes, I know them," Donna May replied. "Did you spend the whole evening with them?" "The whole evening," Nancy replied. "Well, for goodness sake, tell me about it," Donna May begged. As they walked toward the house, Donna May suddenly noticed that George was limping. "Oh, dear! What happened to you?" "Oh, just a little spill," George answered non-committally. "Where?" Donna May asked pointedly. "On a stairway," George replied. "Clumsy of me, wasn't it?" Donna May was silent for a few seconds. She asked no more questions. Apparently, she had decided that her friends were not going to tell any more about their evening at the Bartolomes. Suddenly, Donna May smiled and said, "I have some great news for you girls. You won't have to date Charles and his friends. I've phoned Ned Nickerson. He's coming to the Mardi Gras and bringing Bert and Dave with him." "Hypers!" George exclaimed. "They're really coming?" "They sure are," Donna May answered. "I told you they would," she added smugly. She insisted that the girls change their clothes at once so that the whole group could go downtown to pick out costumes for Ned and his friends to wear to the ball. "Everything must be perfect," she said. "I don't know your friends' sizes, so you girls will have to pick out the costumes." Nancy was disappointed that she could not get in touch with Uncle Rufus immediately. "But," she consoled herself, "on second thought, perhaps I can do a little detective work in New Orleans instead." Inside the house, the girls found Alex starting to dismantle the living room. Pappy Cole was carrying out furniture, and Mammy Matilda was taking down draperies. Mrs. Haver seemed to be flustered and upset about the whole thing. Sighing, she said, "Oh dear, I do wish the showboat could be moved here and this room not disturbed." Nancy agreed. Suddenly an idea came to her. She saw Colonel Haver in the garden and went out to speak to him. She inquired whether every towboat captain in the area had been approached and asked if he could move the River Princess. "Well, I suppose so," the colonel replied. "Alex attended to that, and I'm sure he would have exhausted every means." Nancy began to wonder whether Alex Upgrove had exhausted every means. She decided to make a few inquiries of her own while in the city. There would still be time for the River Princess to be moved before the Havers' ball. George begged off from the trip because her leg was sore and bruised. Nancy and Bess changed into smart cotton knit suits. A short time later, the girls drove off with Donna May in Nancy's car. Within an hour, they had selected 3 different clown suits for the boys from Emerson College. "Before we start home," Nancy said to Donna May as they were leaving the costumers, "I'd like to drive down to the waterfront." Donna May agreed, so Nancy headed for the docks. As she drove past the many wharves, the young sleuth looked intently for any towboats that might be moored there. Presently she came to one and stopped. "I want to run in here a minute," she said. "Be right back. Wait in the car, will you?" Fortunately, the towboat owner, a Captain Runcie, was on board. Nancy inquired if he had ever been asked to move the stranded River Princess. When he said no, she told him about the ball and the Havers' plans. "Captain Runcie, would you consider trying to tow the showboat out of the bayou?" Nancy asked. "I'll be glad to look her over and let you know." "Then could you come to the Haver home and talk to the colonel?" "I'll be there early tomorrow morning," Captain Runcie promised. "Thank you very much," said Nancy. "We'll be looking for you." When she returned to the car, Nancy said nothing about her errand because she felt Donna May might be upset to learn that Alex had not explored every possibility in having the old boat moved. At once, the girl complained about Nancy's secrecy. The young detective merely laughed and said, "I'm full of secrets, all right. But I'll let you in on one. My next stop will be the police station." "Oh!" Donna May cried out. "Why?" "I still hope to track down my stolen car," Nancy replied. When they reached police headquarters, she went inside alone and introduced herself to the captain in charge. "Is there any news about my missing car or the man who stole it?" she asked. "No, there isn't, Miss Drew," the captain replied. "But we do have a little news that may be a clue. My men made a thorough search of the room that fella rented. In it, they found a suitcase full of women's clothes." "A suitcase?" Nancy exclaimed. "Maybe it's my stolen bag." End of chapter 17.